Hello, Mama, and welcome back to the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast, episode 4. I'm Emily McDermott, and I am here beside you on this journey as we work together to declutter your home, head, and heart. If you've had a chance to listen to episode 2, you may have an idea at this point what your main source of overwhelm is. For most people, it is too much stuff. The reason it's probably number one for most people is because the stuff is what we can see. It's what's all around us, right? So once we know we want to start decluttering, the question is, where do we start and when do we find the time to do it? Hard questions for sure, but today I hope we can begin to answer them. So what do you say? Grab that notebook and pen because it's time to dive into today's episode. Hey there, Mama. Are you tired of all the stuff crowding your home, calendar, and mind? Do you wish you could say goodbye to the endless to-do list running around in your head? Want to declutter but don't know where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to Moms Overcoming Overwhelm, where you will find proven and practical solutions to declutter your home, head, and heart. Hi, I'm Emily, a wife, boy mom, and simplicity seeker. I struggled to get pregnant and felt overwhelmed until I discovered decluttering could create the physical and emotional space I needed to become a mom. Now, 2 kids later, I've transformed my life and motherhood by developing simple systems around decluttering, capsule wardrobes, kid stuff, cleaning and tidying, meal planning, time management, and more, and I can't wait to share them with you. If you're ready to reclaim the time and energy you crave, be present with your kids, and finally enjoy the life and motherhood you so deserve, let's kick overwhelm to the curb, shall we? Grab your lukewarm coffee, your notebook and pen, and clear off some counter space. Let's do this. Where do I start and when do I find the time? When I coach other moms, these are the same 2 questions I get time and time again. And I get it. When you're overwhelmed, it's hard to look at something as daunting as decluttering and think that something that requires so much energy and focus is something you can handle when you're so inundated already. It's one more thing to do on a never-ending to-do list. And when it comes to time, it's hard to even remember if you ate breakfast today, let alone whether you can squeeze in the time to declutter a junk drawer. What I want to do today is to understand why we feel so overwhelmed by the idea of decluttering, which causes us to avoid it altogether. To illustrate, I want to use the example of decluttering our spice rack. This may seem like a strange place to start, and I don't recommend we start your decluttering journey here necessarily, but just go with me here. Let's say you decide that today is the day you want to declutter your spice rack. But instead of doing it yourself, you send in one of your kids to do it for you. Imagine that I gave my 4-year-old son a garbage bag, and I said to him, "Okay, sweetie, I want you to come in here and decide which spices need to go," and then I just let him go at it. What would happen? He probably would make his decisions based upon what spices smelled the best to him, which ones had a pretty label with his favorite colors on it, or he might just put them all in the bag because he doesn't like spicy things anyway. And as a side note, my kids think spaghetti sauce is too spicy. Okay, he's done. Did this take him a long time? No. Was it painful? No. Did he agonize over his decisions? No. Because he was making the decisions based upon what mattered to him. Now, if you listened to last week's episode 3, we talked about the one thing we need to do before you start decluttering. That is decide what matters to you. I have a sense that what matters to you about your spice rack is very different than your child. So this is where the complication and the overwhelm and the perception of lack of time comes into play. Because everything we own, once we buy it, or it's given to us as a gift, becomes imbued with meaning. It means something to us simply because we own it. And there is science to back this up, that we give things more value when we own them. It is called the endowment effect. So let's go back to our spice rack example. This time, you are the one who is going to declutter it. So you take out all the spices and start checking the expiration dates. Seems like a good place to start. You come across a curry powder whose expiration date is January 2021. It's obviously expired, but you open the jar and smell the powder. It smells okay, but do you really need to keep it? Then you remember that you've been meaning to make a curry dish that you have a recipe for on Pinterest for the Instapot. And even though you haven't made it yet, in fact, you've never used the Instapot, it's still something that you think you might make in the future. And so you decide to keep the curry powder and move on to the next spice of the 50 jars lined up on the counter. This is why decluttering is so hard. Because not only do we give more meaning to the things that we own, but then we also have other things that come into play that make our decisions harder. We have our aspirational selves made up of the things that we want to do but haven't done, like cook curry in an Instapot, who we used to be, or the person that we want to be in the future. Or we feel guilty because we paid money for the curry powder and feel wasteful throwing it away. And then we continue to mom shame ourselves for not being the mom that can get her act together to cook an Indian chicken curry recipe in the Instapot. And so, after all of this mental back and forth, we are reluctant to let even an expired curry powder jar go because we think we might use it someday. And if we're agonizing this much over a simple jar of spice, how much harder will it be for us to do anything else? I'm definitely not saying this to discourage you, but I want you to realize that once we own something, it becomes harder and harder over time to let go of it because we have these psychological biases working against us. And so every time we start decluttering, we are faced with these biases of memories, sentiment, aspirational selves, guilt, fear, and other things. So where does that leave us? What we need is to shift our mindset around the roadblocks that are preventing us from being able to declutter with ease, because we do not have the time or energy, nor do we want to be spending our precious time and energy on agonizing over each thing we declutter. We will get nowhere, or we won't even start. I've linked a recent Instagram post I did in the show notes where I talk about the 3 layers of stuff. Essentially, if we recognize why something is difficult to declutter, we can ask ourselves better questions to get over what holds us back and be better able to let go. It's all about learning to strengthen our decision-making muscles, and always through the lens of what matters most to us. So to recap, the reason you don't have time to declutter is because everything we own has meaning and has more meaning the longer we own it. This, along with the other psychological biases, make it difficult to declutter, which makes it seem overwhelming and very time-consuming. So there's nothing wrong with you if you don't feel like you have the time and energy to declutter, but we know that it's extremely important, so we need to attack these roadblocks together. Speaking of doing things together, I recently created a free Facebook group called Decluttering Tips and Support for Overwhelmed Moms. You can search for it in Facebook or just click on the link in the show notes. I would love to help provide support on your decluttering journey and look forward to seeing you there. Next week, we are going to talk about the very first things you should declutter. Spoiler alert, they are not your kids' baby blankets crocheted by your grandmother. They are the things that take the least amount of energy and are the least painful because that's what we need, and some small wins to get us going. I look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Bye for now. Hey Mama, thanks so much for joining me today on the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode and learned something new, could you do me a big favor and screenshot today's episode and share it to your Instagram stories? You can tag me at Simple by Emmy. That's Simple by EMMY. That way more mamas just like you can find out about the podcast, and we can all work together to declutter our homes, heads, and hearts. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye!